Hello. When I first met Lisa, I thought she was out of my league. She was the kind of woman people noticed, lively, magnetic, the center of every conversation. I was the quiet, observant type, more comfortable in the background than in the spotlight. But for some reason, she noticed me. We met in college during a mutual friend's party. I was there reluctantly, nursing a drink in the corner, watching people move around like they belonged there. Then Lisa walked in, laughing at something, the kind of laugh that made you turn your head. She was confident, glowing with this effortless energy that made people gravitate toward her. I didn't expect her to talk to me, but she did. She teased me about looking bored, pulled me into a conversation I wasn't ready for, and before I knew it, I was hooked. Lisa had a way of making the ordinary feel exciting. A simple walk to class turned into an adventure. A grocery run became a competition to find the weirdest item on the shelves. She was spontaneous, full of ideas, always planning something fun. I was the steady one, the planner, the one who made sure things actually got done. We balanced each other out in a way that just worked. By our senior year, we were inseparable. I proposed a few months after graduation, nothing elaborate, just the two of us on a quiet evening, but she made it feel like the grandest moment in the world. We got married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and family, and for the first few years, life was simple and good. I worked in finance, a stable job that I took seriously. Lisa, with her charm and way with people, built a career in public relations. She thrived in social settings, making connections easily, excelling in ways that never surprised me. We bought our first home, a modest place that needed some fixing up, but it was ours. We spent weekends painting walls, picking out furniture, building a life together. We traveled when we could, not extravagant trips, but meaningful ones. A road trip along the coast, a spontaneous weekend in a cabin, little escapes that reminded us why we worked so well together. Lisa was always pushing me to try new things, food, hobbies, experiences I would have never considered on my own. I grounded her in return, gave her a safe place to land when life got overwhelming. She wanted kids early on, and I was more than ready. When our son was born, I felt a love I couldn't put into words. 2 years later, our daughter arrived, and our family felt complete. Lisa was an amazing mother, full of warmth and playfulness, always coming up with creative ways to keep the kids entertained. Our house was filled with laughter, with the kind of chaos that made life feel full. I thought we had it all. I thought we were one of the lucky ones. Marriage, for all its romantic ideals, is really about rhythm. You fall into step with each other, creating routines, habits, and small unspoken understandings. Lisa and I had our rhythm, and for years, it felt natural, effortless. Mornings were predictable. I would wake up first, make coffee, and read the news while she slept in a little longer. She was never a morning person, but she had a way of making even her grogginess charming. When she finally got out of bed, she'd shuffle into the kitchen, steal a sip of my coffee even though she had her own, and mumble something about how she wished she could stay home all day. But she never did. She thrived on movement, on being out in the world, on filling her days with conversations and ideas. She was ambitious in a way I admired. While my career was steady and predictable, hers was constantly evolving. She started in public relations, working long hours, juggling clients, attending events that always seemed more exciting than my spreadsheets and meetings. She had a way of making people feel important, of getting them to open up and trust her. It was her superpower. At home, she was equally charismatic. She turned everyday moments into memories. She planned elaborate birthday parties for the kids, full of details that made everything feel magical. She made holidays special, not just because of the decorations or the traditions, but because of the energy she put into them. Even something as simple as a Friday night at home became an event. Pizza, movie marathons, and ridiculous games that had the kids laughing until they couldn't breathe. Our love wasn't just built on big moments. It was in the small things, the way she'd reach for my hand absent-mindedly while we watched TV, the way she'd hum to herself while cooking, the way she'd leave little notes in my work bag just because. We had our challenges like any couple. There were stressful days, disagreements about money, times when work pulled us in opposite directions. But at the end of it all, we always found our way back to each other. That was the kind of relationship we had, or at least, the kind I believed we had. As the kids grew, so did our responsibilities. School drop-offs, extracurricular activities, work commitments, it all piled up. We were busy, but it was a good kind of busy, the kind that made you feel like you were building something real. Lisa still loved to go out, to see friends, to host dinner parties. She kept our social calendar full, making sure we stayed connected to the world outside our little family bubble. I was happy to let her take the lead on that. She was the one who made life exciting, and I was happy to go along for the ride. Looking back, I wonder if I was too content, too comfortable. But at the time, I thought we were solid. We had built something strong, something worth holding on to, and I had no reason to believe otherwise. Years passed, and life settled into something that felt secure, like a house that had been standing long enough to prove its strength. We had built a life together that, from the outside, seemed perfect. We had a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, 2 incredible children, and careers that gave us both a sense of purpose. Lisa was the heartbeat of our family, the one who kept everything moving. She was the kind of mother other parents admired, always present at school events, always volunteering, always making sure our kids had the best experiences. She had an energy that never seemed to fade, a passion for life that made everything feel special. I often thought about how lucky I was to have her, how lucky our kids were to have a mother who cared so deeply. Work kept me busy, but I always made time for my family. I was the steady one, the problem solver, the person who made sure things ran smoothly behind the scenes. While Lisa thrived in the social aspects of life, I was content to take a quieter role. I coached our son's little league team, helped with homework, and made sure we had Sunday mornings together as a family. It wasn't always perfect, but it was ours. Our marriage had changed over the years, but that was normal. The early days of passion and excitement had given way to something deeper, something more comfortable. We weren't the young couple who stayed up all night talking or took spontaneous road trips anymore, but we were still solid. We still held hands in the car, still had our inside jokes, still found moments of closeness even in the chaos of everyday life. Lisa had always been independent, and I loved that about her. She had her own friends, her own interests, her own way of seeing the world. I never wanted to be the kind of husband who stifled his wife, who made her feel trapped. So I encouraged her to go out, to take time for herself, to have a life outside of being a mother and a wife. I thought it was what made us strong, our ability to be our own people while still being together. Looking back, I wonder if I should have paid closer attention to the little things. The nights she stayed out later than usual. The way she seemed more distracted at times, lost in thought. The way she had started guarding her phone, even though I never had a reason to look. But at the time, none of it seemed like a red flag. I trusted her. I believed in us. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of memories, of laughter, of building a life together. And in my mind, nothing had ever been wrong. If you had asked me back then whether I trusted Lisa, I would have said yes without hesitation. I had never been the jealous type, never felt the need to check her phone or question where she was going. But trust isn't something that shatters all at once. It cracks, little by little, until one day you realize it's broken. It started with small things, things I could easily explain away. Lisa had always been social, always busy, but lately, she seemed distracted, even when she was home. She would sit on the couch with her phone, her thumbs moving quickly over the screen, smiling at something before turning the screen away from me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just chatting with her friends, planning something for the kids. But then there were the nights she came home later than usual. Lisa always had a packed schedule, work events, dinners with friends, charity functions. But now, she was going out more often, and her explanations were vaguer. Work ran late. Just a last-minute get-together. I needed some air. It wasn't the words themselves that bothered me. It was how she said them. Rushed, casual, almost rehearsed. Like she had anticipated the question before I even asked it. Then there was the perfume. Lisa had always worn perfume, but one night when she came home, I noticed a scent I didn't recognize. It was subtle, different from the one she usually wore. When I asked about it, she laughed it off. Oh, one of the girls had a new bottle, and I tried it. Do you like it? It seemed harmless, but something about it stuck with me. The biggest change, though, was her phone. Lisa and I had never been the kind of couple who kept passwords from each other. It wasn't something we even thought about. But now, she kept her phone close, always face down on the table, always in her pocket when she walked away. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, her phone vibrated. She picked it up quickly, glanced at the screen, and put it back down. I saw the flicker of something on her face. Was it guilt? Amusement? Whatever it was, she didn't tell me who it was from. For the first time in our marriage, I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid, that Lisa had never given me a reason to doubt her. Still, a voice in the back of my mind whispered, something isn't right. And once that thought was planted, it refused to go away. Once suspicion takes root, it doesn't let go. It lingers in the background, creeping into quiet moments, twisting even the most innocent things into something darker. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned his wife's every move, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Lisa was still Lisa, still laughing, still playing the perfect wife and mother, but there was something different beneath the surface. It was in the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she didn't look at me. The small pauses before she answered questions. The way she seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was sitting right beside me. I started paying closer attention. It was subtle at first. The way she would linger a few extra seconds in the driveway after coming home, like she needed a moment to collect herself before walking through the door. The way her phone, once casually left on the counter or nightstand, was now always with her, silent, screen dark, notifications hidden. The way she would get dressed a little nicer, take a little more time with her makeup, even for the most mundane errands. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was looking for problems where none existed. But the more I noticed, the harder it became to ignore. One evening, Lisa told me she had a late meeting at work. That wasn't unusual. Her job required networking, events, socializing. But when she came home, something felt off. She smelled of perfume, but not her usual scent. There was a faint hint of alcohol on her breath, though she wasn't drunk. She looked at me, smiled, kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal. And maybe it was. Maybe it really was just a work meeting. But that night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The next day, I checked the mileage on her car before she left for work. I had never done something like that before, never felt the need to. It made me feel pathetic, like some insecure fool, but I couldn't stop myself. That evening, when she came home, I checked again. The numbers didn't add up. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe she ran extra errands. Maybe she took a different route home. Or maybe she was lying. That was the moment something shifted inside me. This wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't just insecurity. Something was wrong. And for the first time, I knew I had to find out the truth. Lisa and I had been married for 15 years, but lately, she felt like a stranger. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I caught glimpses of the woman I had built a life with. The way she smiled at the kids, the way she laughed at a joke on TV. But those moments were rare now, disappearing faster than I could hold on to them. Most of the time, she seemed distant, distracted, present in the room, but somewhere else entirely. It wasn't just my imagination. I could feel the space growing between us, widening with every passing day. She spent more time out of the house than she used to. At first, it was easy to explain: work events, outings with friends, errands that always seemed to take longer than expected. But now it felt excessive. I would come home from work expecting to see her, only to find a text message saying she'd be late. Work dinner, last-minute drinks with the girls. Ran into an old friend, catching up. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But something about the way she said these things, the way she delivered them so effortlessly, made my stomach turn. She didn't touch me like she used to. Not just intimately at all. No casual brushes of the hand. No kisses goodbye. No reaching for me in the middle of the night. It was as if her body had forgotten mine, like I had become invisible to her in ways I couldn't understand. I told myself I was imagining things. That marriage changed, that people got comfortable, that maybe we had fallen into one of those phases where life got in the way. But there was something else. Something just beneath the surface, something unspoken. Her phone was always with her now. Face down, notifications hidden, carried from room to room like a secret she couldn't afford to leave behind. When it rang, she would glance at it quickly before deciding whether or not to answer. When I was in the room, she would tilt the screen away, just enough to make sure I couldn't see. I started watching for signs. Not out of paranoia, but because my gut was telling me something wasn't right. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized I wasn't imagining it. Lisa was hiding something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. Doubt had become my shadow, following me everywhere. It was in the way I looked at Lisa, the way I listened to her words, the way I searched for meaning in every glance, every movement. She was careful now, more careful than before. When she left the house, she no longer told me details. She didn't say where she was going, who she was meeting, or when she'd be back. Just vague excuses. Always vague. And when she came home, she moved through the house like a ghost, light on her feet, avoiding my gaze whenever possible. I didn't recognize her anymore. The warmth in her voice had dulled, replaced by something colder, something distant. She wasn't unkind, but she wasn't present either. It was like she was living a double life, playing the role of wife and mother out of obligation, while her mind was elsewhere, somewhere I couldn't reach. I found myself watching her without meaning to, studying her, looking for cracks in the lies I wasn't sure she was telling. She was always texting, always on her phone, but never in front of me. If I entered the room, she would put it down, sometimes locking the screen so quickly it felt like instinct. One night, I heard her laughing, really laughing, the way she used to with me. It was late, past midnight, and I had gotten up to get a drink of water. Her voice carried from the living room, hushed, but full of something I hadn't heard in a long time. Joy. She was on the phone, curled up on the couch, smiling at something or someone. I stepped closer, just enough to see her expression. It was the kind of smile that wasn't forced, the kind that came from genuine happiness. But when she noticed me standing there, it vanished. She stared at me for a second too long, her face unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned off her phone and walked past me, heading upstairs as if nothing had happened. She didn't say goodnight, and I didn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding. I had spent 15 years believing in Lisa and us. I had built my life on the foundation of that belief. But now, I wasn't sure if I even knew the woman lying next to me. And worse, I wasn't sure if she cared. There's a certain kind of pain that exists beyond anger, beyond grief. A pain so deep that it hollows you out from the inside, leaving behind something unrecognizable. I didn't know that kind of pain until now. For weeks, the weight of suspicion had been crushing me. Lisa had become someone I didn't know, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I believed in was a lie. But even then, even with the distance between us, even with all the small betrayals, the hidden texts, the guarded expressions, the coldness, I hadn't let my mind go to the worst possibility. Until the thought crept in. It started small, a whisper in the back of my mind, a passing doubt that I hated myself for having. But once it was there, I couldn't unthink it. Our children, my son, my daughter. Had I ever questioned it before? No, not once. I had held them in my arms the day they were born, memorized every detail of their faces, felt a love so overwhelming it had reshaped my entire existence. They were mine. They had to be mine. But then I started looking, really looking. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. But the more I stared, the more I saw what I had ignored for years. They didn't look like me, not even a little. They didn't have my features, my mannerisms, my bloodline running through their veins. And when I dug deeper, when I started to see pictures of Lisa's old friends, old colleagues, the people she had known for years, I saw something I wasn't ready to see. A resemblance. Not to me, to someone else. I felt sick. The idea clawed at me, refused to let go. I told myself I needed proof. Real proof. So I bought a DNA test. I didn't tell Lisa. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it. I swabbed my children's mouths while they slept, whispering silent apologies as I sealed the tests away. I told myself I was crazy, that I was going to feel like an idiot when the results came back, that I would tear them up and pretend I had never doubted them in the first place. 2 weeks later, an email arrived in my inbox. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were shaking when I finally clicked it open. 0% probability of paternity. I blinked. Read it again. And again. Both children. Neither of them were mine. The world blurred. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might stop. My body felt numb, disconnected, like I wasn't even inside it anymore. 15 years. 15 years of raising them, of loving them, of believing I was their father. 15 years of lies. I couldn't breathe. Somewhere in the house, Lisa was laughing at something on TV. The sound of it made my stomach turn. I clenched my fists, the paper trembling in my grip. The woman I loved had betrayed me. Not just once. For 15 years. and I had given her everything. But now, I was going to take it all back. Rage is a strange thing. It doesn't hit you all at once, like in the movies where a betrayed husband flips a table and screams at his unfaithful wife. No, real rage is slow. It simmers beneath the surface, growing hotter with each passing second until it reaches the point of no return. That's where I was the moment I read the DNA results. 2 lines of text shattered my entire existence, confirming that neither of my children, the ones I had raised, loved, sacrificed for, were biologically mine. 15 years. 15 years of lies. 15 years of looking into their faces, believing I saw parts of myself when there was nothing of me in them at all. Lisa had stolen my legacy, my bloodline, my future. And for what? For who? That was the part that burned the most. I sat alone in the living room for hours, staring at the papers, my mind caught between grief and fury. I thought about the late nights Lisa had been out, the way she had pulled away from me emotionally and physically, the secrets I had sensed but never dared to confront. This wasn't a single betrayal. It was a lifetime of deception. My entire marriage had been a lie, and I had been too blind, too trusting to see it. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to break every picture frame in the house. But I didn't, because I knew that rage alone wasn't enough. I wanted revenge, and I wanted it to be complete, devastating, irreversible. Lisa had spent years lying to me, controlling the narrative of our life. She had thought she could cheat, lie, and manipulate her way into keeping everything. The home, the stability, the perfect image. But she had underestimated me. She had underestimated what I would do when I found out the truth. I refused to be the broken husband begging for an explanation. I refused to be the man drowning in sorrow while she played the victim. No, I was going to take back everything. That night, I left the house without a word. I didn't tell Lisa where I was going, and she didn't ask. She was too wrapped up in whatever fantasy world she had built for herself, too confident that she still had control over me. But she didn't. Not anymore. I had spent 15 years being the faithful, devoted husband. The man who put his family first. The man who ignored every red flag because he believed in love, in loyalty, in vows that were supposed to mean something. But if she had been unfaithful for 15 years, why should I hold on to my vows for even one more night? I met up with someone. Someone who had been giving me attention for a while. Someone who had noticed the shift in my marriage before I was willing to admit it myself. It wasn't about love, and it wasn't even about lust. It was about power. For the first time in years, I was in control. I wasn't the fool sitting at home, waiting for his wife to come back from another work event. I wasn't the clueless husband sleeping next to a woman who had lied to him every single day of their marriage. That night, I made sure Lisa was no longer the only one keeping secrets. And I didn't feel a shred of guilt. By the time I returned home, Lisa was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a long time, just watching her. She looked peaceful, like someone who had never worried about the consequences of their actions. But that peace was about to end. Because tomorrow, I was going to ruin her life the way she had ruined mine. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the DNA results in front of me, waiting for Lisa to wake up. When she finally walked in, she barely glanced at me, too busy scrolling through her phone, probably texting whoever the real father of my children was. The sight of it made my blood boil, but I kept my voice calm when I spoke her name. She paused, looking up at me, sensing something was off. I slid the paper across the table, watching as she picked it up. I didn't say a word as her eyes moved over the results, the color draining from her face as she processed what she was reading. I expected panic. I expected tears. But all she did was sit there in stunned silence. When she finally looked up, her expression was blank. And then, she asked a question that made my stomach turn. How did you find out? Not an apology. Not an attempt to explain. Just a cold, detached question, as if I had uncovered an inconvenient truth rather than the single worst betrayal of my life. That was when I knew, with absolute certainty, that she had never felt guilty about any of it. She hadn't spent years struggling with remorse. She had simply hoped I would never find out. I exhaled slowly, my hands resting on the table as I looked her straight in the eye. I want you out. My voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the finality in it. Lisa's lips parted slightly, as if she was about to protest, but no words came out. She swallowed hard, blinking a few times like she was trying to process the fact that this time, she wasn't in control. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged. Not my problem. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Lisa had spent our entire marriage playing the role of the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the woman who always had everything figured out. But she had built her world on a foundation of lies, and now that the truth had surfaced, there was nothing left to hold it together. She had assumed I would never leave. She had assumed I would be the kind of man who forgave, who compromised, who tried to salvage what was already beyond repair. But she had been wrong. I stood up, leaning in close enough that she could hear every word as I whispered, "You took everything from me. Now I'm taking everything from you." She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She just got up from the table and walked toward the bedroom, her hands shaking as she began packing her things. I watched her go, feeling nothing but satisfaction. Lisa was finally going to feel the emptiness she had forced me to live with for 15 years. And I wasn't going to shed a single tear for her. Lisa had spent 15 years making choices that she never thought she'd have to pay for. She had lied, manipulated, and built a life on a foundation of betrayal, all while smiling in my face, acting as if nothing was wrong. But now, for the first time, she was powerless. And I was going to make sure she felt it. She tried to stall, to buy herself time. She packed her bag slowly, as if dragging out the process would somehow change my mind. But there was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. I had given her everything, a home, love, loyalty, and in return, she had given me another man's children. There was no apology that could undo what she had done. She attempted to argue, but her voice lacked the confidence she once carried. "Please, we can talk about this," she said, her tone almost pleading. "I know you're angry, but we don't have to do this like this." I almost laughed at the audacity. We don't have to do this like this? As if there was a version of this where I would hold her hand and tell her I understood. As if there was a version where I would just forgive and forget, where we could somehow pretend that she hadn't stolen my entire life from me. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her shove clothes into a suitcase. "You have 10 minutes, Lisa," I said coldly. "After that, I don't care if you walk out of here with nothing." Her hands trembled as she zipped up the bag. She wasn't used to being on this side of the power dynamic. For years, she had held control, making the decisions, weaving the lies, playing the role of devoted wife while carrying on her secret life behind my back. Now, I was the one calling the shots. She tried to reach for sympathy, her voice shaking as she looked at me. "The kids. They're not my kids," I cut her off. The words felt like acid on my tongue, but they were the truth. And if their real father wants them, he can take care of them now. For the first time, she actually flinched. She hadn't expected that. Maybe she thought I would still play the role of father, that my love for them would be enough to make me stay. But my love had been built on a lie, and now, all I could see when I looked at them was the proof of her betrayal. I wasn't going to let her keep one single piece of me. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't for me. They weren't even for the kids. They were for her. She was finally realizing that she had lost. I had spoken to a lawyer that morning. Lisa didn't know it yet, but I had already begun the legal process to ensure she left this marriage with nothing. The house was in my name, our assets were divided in a way that favored me, and since I wasn't biologically tied to the children, I had no financial obligation to support them. She had taken my life from me for 15 years. Now, I was erasing her from mine. When she finished packing, she stood in the doorway, gripping the handle of her suitcase so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. I stared at her, expression blank. Not my problem. Her breath hitched, and for the first time, true desperation flickered in her eyes. She had spent years believing she would never face consequences. She thought she was untouchable, that her lies would stay buried forever. But now, she was standing on the edge of the life she had built, watching it collapse around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I opened the front door and stepped aside. "Get out." She hesitated for just a second, maybe expecting me to change my mind, maybe waiting for me to break. But I didn't. She walked past me, stepping out into the cold night air, her suitcase dragging behind her. I didn't watch her go. I didn't care where she ended up. I shut the door, locked it, stood in the silence of the house that used to be ours but now belonged to me alone. Lisa had played her game, and she had lost. The house was silent after Lisa left, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence I had once cherished. It was the emptiness of a life that had been ripped apart, a void where trust and love had once existed. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the space she had occupied just moments before. 15 years. Gone in a single night. I should have felt relief, satisfaction, even. I had done what needed to be done. Lisa was out of my life, and she had nothing left to cling to. No home, no marriage, no security. She was facing the consequences she had never thought she'd have to answer for. But as I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the DNA results one last time, all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. The truth had freed me, but it had also destroyed everything I thought I knew. The children I had raised, the ones I had tucked into bed at night, whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose birthdays I had celebrated, they weren't mine. And yet, even as the thought cut through me, I couldn't erase the love I had for them. Biology didn't change the years of memories, the moments that had once felt so pure, so real. But those memories were poisoned now, tainted by the knowledge that every single one of them had been built on a lie. I didn't contact Lisa after that night. I didn't ask where she went, and I didn't care. She tried to call a few times, but I blocked her number. I wasn't interested in apologies, explanations, or last-ditch efforts to salvage what she had destroyed. The divorce was swift. Lisa had nothing to fight for. She knew she wouldn't win. I kept the house, the money, everything. She left with the clothes on her back and whatever she could carry, and I didn't lose a second of sleep over it. She had taken enough from me. The hardest part was the kids. I wrestled with what to do, whether I should tell them the truth or simply walk away. In the end, I did neither. They were innocent in all of this, and despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to vanish from their lives without a word. I saw them a few times after Lisa left, but something had changed. I couldn't look at them the same way, couldn't silence the voice in my head reminding me that they weren't mine. The bond we had was real, but it had been built on deception, and I wasn't strong enough to separate the two. Eventually, I made the hardest choice of all. I stepped away. I didn't tell them why, didn't shatter their world the way mine had been shattered. I simply became the man who used to be their father, a presence that faded into the background until I was nothing more than a memory. It was the only way I could move forward without drowning in the weight of what Lisa had done. Time passed. The pain dulled, but it never fully disappeared. Some nights, I still lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had been so blind. Wondering how someone I had loved so deeply could betray me so completely. But with each passing day, the memories felt less like open wounds and more like distant scars, reminders of a past life I had survived. One day, I looked in the mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Myself. Not the broken man Lisa had left behind, not the fool who had been played for 15 years. Just me. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Lisa had taken everything from me. But she hadn't destroyed me. I had lost my marriage, my family, the life I thought I had built. But I was still standing. And that meant I had one. Bye-bye.